Hey friends, this is Jordan with O & Co Games. We are working on a pixel platformer called Tethergeist in GameMaker, and in this video I wanted to give you a tutorial on how to set up Steam stats and achievements for your GameMaker game. I'm going to be assuming that you already know how to export a .exe, that you already have a Steamworks account, and that you're already able to set up a game and an app within Steam. So this tutorial is to take you to that next step to be able to set up achievements in Steam and to set up Steam stats, which can be used for various purposes, whether that be achievements or actually sending data back to your game, or even setting up dashboards to get a better view of what your player base is doing. So ultimately what's going to be happening is in GameMaker, you are going to be talking directly to Steam using the Steam SDK and an extension that we will install into GameMaker. And then Steam is going to be storing whatever data you send it from your GameMaker game. It's going to store it into something that you have to configure, your custom Steam stats configuration. And then from Steam, it can use that data that you've sent it from GameMaker to inform your achievement system, or to even send data back to GameMaker, kind of like I was talking about earlier. Or you can even pull that data into a kind of gameplay analytics dashboard. I'm not going to get too far into the details on how to do this. My assumption is that if you're able to get as far as putting data into Steam, you'll be well equipped to figure out how to pull that data to gather insights for like analytics dashboards and to understand your player base. So at any rate, that's what we'll be going over today. So there are kind of three main steps to getting this whole process going. The first is to set up Steam in GameMaker. The next is to set up those stats. And the last thing is to get GameMaker to talk to Steam. So with that, let's just kind of get into it. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is to set up the Steamworks SDK on your local machine. And then once we have that SDK in place, we can then install the extension to GameMaker that allows GameMaker to talk directly to Steam. SDK is short for Software Development Kit, and ultimately all it really is just a folder that contains various files and codes that GameMaker is going to need to be able to talk directly to Steam. So we don't need to learn any like proprietary Steam coding languages or anything like that. We just need to have this folder on our local machine, and that's going to allow us to talk to Steam. So there's this lovely article that is on GameMaker's website. I'll include the URL in the description below to this video. This article talks you through how to determine which SDK, which version of the SDK you need, and then how to download and put it in the correct location on your computer. So anyway, I'm going to walk you through this really quick. They say that GameMaker versions, they all expect different versions of the SDK. So you'll need to make sure that you're using the correct version of the Steamworks SDK, and the information can be found on their required SDKs page. This page is nice, but ultimately, I don't know that you even need to navigate to it, because in the marketplace, the extension that you'll be installing for GameMaker will also tell you which SDK you need. So if I come to this URL here, Steamworks functionalities, I'm using our official Steamworks extension. This link here is going to take us directly to the GameMaker marketplace. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And here we are in the GameMaker marketplace, and it tells you right here, if you're on GameMaker version, what was that, GMS 2.3, version 2.00, you'll need the Steamworks SDK 1.6.0. So to get this SDK, if we come back to our article on how to install the SDK, there's this nifty link here that takes you to Steam's partner page, where you can install the SDK. So I'm going to go ahead and click this link here, and you will see a list of all the different versions of the Steamworks SDK available to us. Full disclosure here, for Tethergeist, the game that my team is working on, we used SDK 1.55. So if you see 1.55 in this tutorial, just understand that that's something that we're using for Tethergeist. It may not necessarily be the version that you need to use. You'll just need to make sure that you're using the version associated with your version of GameMaker. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, which version should I get? The easiest thing to do is just make sure that whatever version of GameMaker you have is aligned with the version they're expecting you to see in the extension. And then you can just get the SDK 1.6, which is what we will be using in this tutorial. So Anyway, once you get to this page, you will go ahead and download 1.6 SDK release. I'll click that and it will pop it into my downloads folder. So if I navigate to my downloads folder in my file explorer, you can see the SDK here. Now it is a zip file, and in order for it to actually work and help us, we need to extract it. So I'm going to choose extract all. And at this point you can choose the destination. It's not really a big deal where you put it, so long as wherever you put it, that position never changes. So in that light, GameMaker recommends that you download it directly to your C drive. And for the sake of simplicity, that's what I'll be doing in this tutorial as well. And honestly, I've found it to be the easiest way to go about it. So to put it in your C drive, select Browse, and you can navigate to this PC, choose Windows C, and you can add it to your C drive here. As you can see, there's the SDK that we're using for Tethergeist already sitting in here. You won't necessarily have that. You might not have any SDKs here. Whatever the case is, extract it into your C drive. So I'm going to go ahead and select the folder. And I'm actually going to name the folder Steamworks _SDK _160, just so I can differentiate which SDK I'm using. So I'm going to go ahead and choose extract. That is going to extract the SDK into my C drive, as you can see directly here. So there's Steamworks SDK 160, and here's the SDK folder. This includes all of those fancy files that I talked about that allow GameMaker to communicate directly with Steam. Okay. So with the SDK on our C drive, we're now ready to go and install the extension into GameMaker. So if you come over back to our nifty SDK page, that directed us again to this official Steamworks extension that's in the GameMaker marketplace. Here you'll want to download the extension. Now, if you don't have a download button, you need to be logged in to obtain access. So you'll want to click this icon here in the top right to log into your GameMaker account online. I'm going to go ahead and log in with my existing GameMaker account. I'll choose register and sign in. Technically, I'm just signing into my existing account. Okay, so if you had to go through the login process, it's going to direct you to the wrong URL. It's not going to redirect you back to that marketplace. So once you've logged in, you'll need to just navigate your way back to the marketplace. If you have this article open, you can just click this file again. And we are now back to the marketplace where we can download the Steamworks extension. Okay, so here we are in the GameMaker marketplace. Click the download button here. That is going to download the Steamworks extension with this big, long, ugly name. So again, we're going to come back over to our downloads folder, and we can go ahead and just extract all of this directly into our downloads folder. And this is going to unzip the Steamworks extension for us. This folder contains a lot of tools and resources. And it even includes a GameMaker file that you can open up and explore to see how the Steamworks extension works. For our purposes today, all you really need is to open up this extensions folder, and you'll just need this folder here, the Steamworks extension folder. Now, it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out how to add an extension to a GameMaker game. All you need to do is drag and drop this folder into your GameMaker project. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open my GameMaker game. Here's my GameMaker project for Tethergeist. It's a copy from my original one, so I'm just using it for this tutorial. All you need to do is take this folder, the Steamworks folder, and drag it and drop it directly into the assets tree here, and GameMaker will do the rest for you. Okay, so we now have the Steamworks extension installed in our GameMaker game. So now that we have the Steamworks extension installed in our GameMaker game, we can then configure it so that GameMaker knows how it's supposed to reference the SDK and talk directly to Steam. So for our example here, we are going to just select Windows. Obviously, if you're on a Mac, you would select Mac. And then the things you really need to worry most about configuring are pointing the GameMaker game to where your SDK is on your local machine. And then you'll also need to fill out the application ID. So First, we're going to find our SDK on our local machine by selecting these three dots here. This will open up our file explorer, at which point we are going to navigate to our C drive. So you would select this PC, navigate to the C drive, and select the SDK folder. And then this folder is where the rest of the Steam SDK resides. So if I select this folder, it will auto-populate with C drive, Steamworks _SDK _160 /SDK. So this is now telling GameMaker, here's where to find all of those fancy tools you need to be able to talk to Steam. Now, the application ID is going to be unique to you and your game, and this is where it comes into play that, I'm assuming that you already have a Steamworks account and you already have a game up on Steam. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate over to the Steamworks partner website. So that's partner.steamgames.com. You will need to log into this website and navigate to your dashboard. So here's the dashboard, here's the home page, and what we are trying to find here is the app ID that we're going to put into our SDK. It is not this one right here. Rather, what you'll want to do is navigate to apps and packages, come down to all applications, and here's where you will be able to see a list of all of the games that you have in your Steamworks account. For us, Tethergeist is the only one we currently have. You can see we've got 3 different versions. We've got the coming soon version, the live demo version, and we have a hidden playtest version. For the sake of this tutorial, the demo version is what is live, so that's what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this application. Obviously, you would choose your game out of this list, whichever one you want to be talking to Steam. I'm going to click that and open it. And that will navigate us to this application's sort of dashboard launch page. And the application ID is just right here at the top. You can also see it in the URL. This is also a publicly visible application ID, so no, I'm not showing you anything that I shouldn't be publicly. Every video game on Steam has an application ID that is viewable within the URL. So at any rate, this is the application ID that you'll want to use. I'm just going to copy that and head back over to GameMaker and paste it here. And now the Steamworks extension is configured to not only correctly find the SDK on my local machine here, but also send information to the correct application ID as it resides on Steam. So now that we have our extension configured correctly, we need to head over to our Steamworks account where we are going to set up all of our Steam stats that are going to basically be the house for the data that we want to send to Steam. So I'm going to come back over to my applications dashboard. This is in Steamworks. And here I am on my Tethergeist demo page. This is going to be whatever video game you have on Steam. And within this page, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds. There's a ton of stuff that you can do here. Just for this tutorial, we want to look at the Steam stats section of our game. So to get there, you need to scroll down and you want to edit Steamworks settings. This is underneath the technical tools. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. And here I'm going to navigate to stats and achievements, and then I'm going to choose stats. Now here Tethergeist has a bunch of different stats. I'll explain them in a bit, but this is the page that you need to be able to create the type of data that you want to store in Steam. So you would do that by selecting a new stat. Just for the sake of kind of explaining what we're seeing here, for Tethergeist, what I've done is I've created a stat for like where players are dying and even which rooms they are completing. So it's my way of tracking how far all of the players progress. So this one, for example, is Tethergeist Chapter 1, Part 1, Room 1, Deaths. And this stat is going to be tracking the sum number of player deaths in the first room of the first part of the first chapter of my game, right? And so each one of these different parts you'll need to configure based off of how you want to be tracking the stat. I'll just kind of explain what I'm doing here. This is an integer stat, not a float, so I don't need decimal places or anything like that. I'm just tracking a count of how many times players are dying in this room. It is an increment stat, meaning that it only goes up every time I send information to Steam, and the most it can possibly go up is 1. So in other words, what's ultimately happening here is every time a player dies in Tethergeist, my code in GameMaker, which I'll explain in the latter half of this tutorial, My game in GameMaker is sending a call to Steam and saying, tick that death count number up by 1. And that's what that means, okay? Aggregated is a Boolean statement. You can choose true or false. Choose yes if you are wanting to aggregate all of your player data into something that you can call from Steam to like populate a dashboard. Truthfully, this aggregated Boolean statement isn't terribly important for like individual player achievements necessarily. So it's up to you what you do with that. Ultimately, I am using it to track the number of deaths for all of my players. And so I'm choosing yes for aggregated. And honestly, I don't see any harm in doing that regardless. So at any rate, when you get to this page, likely you won't have any stats populated here. So you'll want to come and choose new stat, at which point it will create a new line item. For me, this will be my 64th stat. I think a lot of games don't quite have this many, at least indie games. Maybe some have significantly more. But whatever the case is, you will add a new stat here. You will choose the stat type, whether it's an integer, a float, or an average rate, and then you will name this stat. Now, this naming convention is something that you'll want to keep track of because this is how you're going to talk to Steam in GameMaker. So that's why I have a naming convention here. For the sake of this tutorial, let's just call this stat 65. That's what we'll call this. And leave this set to client. Choose whether or not you want it to increment or not. Again, so what this column will do is tell Steam that whenever data points are sent to it, do you just increment? Do you just add to the existing stockpile of numbers there? Or is it supposed to override it? If you leave it unchecked, it will override whatever that stat is. And then max change, again, for the integer, I have it ticking up. It's a count, right? I'm counting the number of completions or the number of deaths or whatever it may be. Max change is 1. I think a lot of stats will behave this way, particularly for whatever achievement system you're trying to set up. So for example, let's say you have an achievement for like die 100 times, which is one that we have. I'm just tracking that as a 1 ticker count. If the player dies once, it goes up by 1. Once they hit, say, 100, that's when the achievement is unlocked. So that's what that one does. It just tells you how much it's allowed to change per call over to Steam. And then, like I said previously, aggregated is whether or not you want to be able to include all of your player data into a lump sum analysis. So you'll want to create however many stats are necessary for the achievements that you're trying to track. That's ultimately how you would do it. And then once you have all of these stats in place, you are now ready to go into your GameMaker account and use step events and codes within GameMaker to be able to manipulate these stats on Steam. Okay, so with our stats configured in Steamworks, we can now head back to GameMaker and tell it how we want to interact with those stats, whether that be like populating them with new data, manipulating the data, or bringing that data back into our GameMaker game. So I'm going to head back over to GameMaker. You can see the extension here that we had set up earlier. Now, everybody's project is set up a little differently, but the way that I've set it up in Tethergeist, and honestly the way I recommend doing it, is creating an object whose sole purpose is to interface with Steam. So I've created an object called OSteamStats here in GameMaker. This is an object that is persistent and it's created as soon as the game is created. So it's just kind of an object that is operating behind the scenes, quietly listening for either events or actions the player takes that would prompt it to go update a stat in Steam. Within it, we've got like a step event that is using various functions related to the Steamworks extension that allow it to get information from Steam or send information to Steam. I'll get into the details as to how this code works here in a second. What's important to note now is that these functions like Steam update or Steam get stat int, these aren't functions you're going to just find in the GameMaker help book. These are functions that you will need to reference the SteamStats API for. So I'll include the URL to that as well in the video here, in the video description. But for the sake of this tutorial, if we come back to our nifty GameMaker page, they actually reference the GitHub repository here with this link. Here you can see the Steamworks repository, and if you scroll down, you can see the documentation included as well. So This will be one of your best friends when you're trying to figure out how to code various interactions with your Steam stats. Suffice it to say, at least for this tutorial, that this is where you'll need to go to be able to reference the different types of functions available to you. Now, for stats and achievements specifically, we can head over to this module here, the stats and achievements module, and you'll be able to see a list of all of the different functions that interface with Steam stats. I should also point out that your game is going to be unique to you, to the types of achievements you want to have and the types of stats you want to track. So for the sake of this tutorial, I figure the best use of our time is for me to walk through some of the things we're doing in Tethergeist to show you how to send and get information from Steam, at least in context of our game, and you'll be able to hopefully kind of use that to spark inspiration or get your gears turning as to how you could use it in your game. So I'm going to come back over to GameMaker. Here's our Steam stats object, and this is the step event. So within the step event, I have a specific global variable that decides whether or not Steam tracking needs to be on. This is a variable that I use sometimes to turn it to false if I am playtesting things, or if I'm running if I'm running Tethergeist, but I don't necessarily want it to talk to Steam. I just have a way of turning this variable on and off to then decide whether or not I'm talking to Steam. And then I'm running this function here, Steam update. This needs to reside in any step event that is going to be either getting information from Steam or sending information to it. So that's all that line is doing. And then this first little section here is gathering death counts from Steam stats when the game first boots up. So I'm running this Steam extensions function called Steam stats ready. This is just a Boolean statement, true or false. Is Steam ready to listen to my GameMaker game? And then I also have this global variable here that checks to see if Steam stats have been loaded directly into GameMaker or not. As you can see, if both of these are true, eventually I will say that that's loaded. So this only really runs once. And what I'm doing in each one of these lines here is setting a global variable that I have in Tethergeist to equal the integer value that I'm pulling directly from my Steam stats. This is using the function Steam get stat int. Now you can see here there is a string that matches the string that I used to define my Steam stats over here. Here it is, that C1 P1 R1 underscore deaths. This is tracking the number of deaths in that first room of Tethergeist. This API name is precisely the same name as the one here, and I do believe that is case sensitive. So that's why it's important to make sure that your Steam stats have a naming convention that's easy to use and easy to follow, so that you're able to directly interface with them using code here in GameMaker. Now, obviously you can see I'm just calling that same function over and over again to populate each one of these variables. I'm sure there's a more efficient way to do this with like a for loop or something, but ultimately this just kind of illustrates how to get information from Steam, and I'm specifically pulling an integer and populating variables in Tethergeist to do it. Further down this step event, I'm also sending stats to Steam every time certain events occur. So the way that I've built this in Tethergeist, I have a global variable that's a Boolean statement. Again, this is a true false. If global.send Steam stats, this is a variable that I set equal to true if a certain event happens within Tethergeist where I want to send information to Steam. So for an example, I've pulled up our checkpoint object here. Every time the player reaches a new checkpoint, I want to send that progress over to Steam. And so what I'm doing here is I'm actually setting a variable global.send Steam stats equals true. This will then be picked up by the Steam stats object to run all of this code under here, where it will actually send Steam stats. Again, I'm sure there's a more efficient way to do this. Maybe you want to just call this Steam stats function directly within the checkpoint object. Maybe that's a little too integrated though, because maybe like me, you also want to be able to turn Steam stats on or off. Ultimately, I found this to be kind of the cleanest way to do it, putting it in an actual object. So anyway, I've got multiple objects throughout Tethergeist that call they set this variable to true so that the Steam stats object that's quietly listening in the background then knows, oh, it's true. I'm going to set all the Steam stats, basically update Steam with all of the relevant information. And by the end of it setting those stats, I reset that variable to false. So it only runs at the one time it's called. Okay. Now what I'm doing in here, just to give you an example, I'm setting Steam stats. This is like all the deaths. So I have this variable being set to true in the player object. If the player ever dies in one of the stages, that will send all the deaths. Similarly, let's see if I can find the maybe like room progress is another one. If the room is, currently any of these rooms, then Steam knows that they have completed the prior room, for example. Ultimately, what your key takeaway should be here is that you can use this function, the Steam set stat, specifically int is the one I'm using, and that sets that stat to whatever the variable value is in my game. In this case, it's these different global variables, or maybe like this death variable. I've also got things like counting how often the player pauses or chooses retry, things from there. So the other thing that I think is worth noting here is you can use the integer for like a true false statement. So some of the stats that I'm tracking is if they've completed a certain room. I'm just setting that value to 1. That's the Steam set stat to 1. I've just hard coded the number 1 into it so that, for example, if the player makes it to this room, then I know they completed the room prior. So again, I'm sure there's more efficient ways to do this. Some of you people who've been in coding for a lot longer might be just cringing at how not optimized this code is, but the functionality is there. And the point that I'm really trying to make here is that it's within the step event that you can get stats from Steam and set stats directly in Steam. And that's honestly how your game is going to be talking to the Steamworks API and how you're going to be able to leverage the extension correctly. I'm going to come back to this Steamworks extension, the Steam stats. It's going to be, Steamworks. How it's going to be talking to your application, right? It's as simple as that. You'll just be using these functions within a step event to get and send information to Steam. Okay, now the last thing that we're going to go over in this tutorial is how to actually set up the achievements for your game in Steam. In order to be able to have those achievements working, you'll need to have set up all the stats like we just did prior, and you'll need GameMaker to be updating those stats to a point where if they reach a certain threshold, an achievement is unlocked. So for example, if we wanted to have like 100 deaths, you'll want to have some sort of a value in your stats that tracks total number of deaths, and once that number reaches 100, the achievement is unlocked. So at any rate, here's how to do achievements. You'll want to navigate to the Stats and Achievements tab and come down to the Achievements page. And just for the sake of thoroughness, I'm going to step back just to show you how to get to that view, because the Steamworks navigation menu can be really tricky sometimes. So if you're on the homepage dashboard, you'll want to come over to View All Apps. Then you'll want to select whichever game is the one that you're editing the achievements on. So for our example here, there's the Tethergeist demo. This will bring you to that app's sort of homepage. You'll come down and navigate to Edit Steamworks Settings. And here's how you get to this view, where you get this navigation here. You can hover over Stats and Achievements and come down to Achievements. So here's where you are able to add achievements and edit them based off of the stats that you've already configured. You can see here for our Tethergeist demo, we've only got 6 achievements, but they're all configured to talk to those stats that we've pre-configured. So yeah, let's just go through this. I'm going to choose New Achievement. This first field here is private. Only the developers can see it. None of the public will be able to see it. You can call it whatever you want. And this is what you would also like reference if you're using functions within your Steamworks extension. So for this example, I'll call it achievement example. Now we have to choose which stat this achievement is tied to. So again, these are Steam stats, right? This is data that is being stored directly in Steam. Here's all the different ones that we've done for Tethergeist. You should see whatever stats you've configured during this tutorial here. For this example, I'm going to come down to the demo completed stat. This is a variable that only ever equals 0 or 1, and it's being configured in my Tethergeist game such that If the player reaches the final end screen, there's some code that runs there that says, hey, go set the Steam stat demo complete to equal 1. So only players who reach that final end screen are ever going to have demo complete equal to 1 in Steam. So I'm going to set min value 1, max value 1, and that's just using that Boolean statement. And then this next column is what is actually publicly viewable by your player base. So here is where you'll put the achievement name. We'll call this demo finisher, somebody who finished the demo, and then here's the description of it. And you can type whatever you want here. I'm going to type complete the Tethergeist demo. Okay, this is being set by the client. Here you can choose hidden to equal true or false. This is where you decide whether or not this is an achievement that players can see before they actually achieve it. So all of the achievements that we have, at least in our demo, are viewable by players. If they've opened up Tethergeist, they can see all of these different achievements. Okay, and then you'll also want to choose icons that match, whatever descriptor you want for your achievements. For the sake of continuing the tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and choose an image to populate here for my achievement. Let's say when you get the achievement, it's a color version of the image. And I'm going to go ahead and choose upload. Now you might get this error message. There's an error uploading the image. The application data is missing. Please save the achievement. So you might need to save the achievement first. So I'm going to click save. Now I can come in here and actually edit the images. So if I choose this file for when you've achieved the achievement, then I can choose a different file here. Here's if it's unachieved. Got maybe like a black and white version of it. You can choose obviously whatever artwork you want here, and then you're able to save those. So now we've created an achievement. This is where if you complete the demo, you'll get demo finisher, complete the Tethergeist demo, and then we've set up kind of our icons here. So that's how you set up achievements in Steam. Anyway, that about covers everything that I wanted to go over in this tutorial. So for the sake of summarizing, we downloaded and added the Steam SDK to our local computer, saved it on our C drive, and then through the GameMaker marketplace, we added the Steamworks extension to our GameMaker game. Using that extension, we are then able to call functions like Steam set stat int to send information to Steam, where it is then stored in our Steam stats that we had to configure ourselves. Now those Steam stats house that data that can then be used to inform our achievement system. That data can also be read back into our GameMaker game. And something we didn't cover in this tutorial, but you can even use an aggregated form of those Steam stats to put together dashboards and understand your player base and your gameplay analytics. So hopefully this tutorial was helpful to you. Obviously, any game that you're trying to put on Steam, the achievement system is a pretty big part of it. And it's honestly a relatively streamlined experience once you've got your whole engine set up. So anyway, thank you so much for watching and happy game making.